What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode. My name's Jeff, and today I'm going to teach you how to homebrew a Tangerine Hefeweizen. Now, my mom is not a huge fan of beers, unfortunately. However, she loves tangerine wheat from Lost Coast. So my hope today is that I can make a homebrew that's similar to that she can drink and enjoy. I'm really excited about brewing today because I've never brewed a wheat beer before. This is something brand new. Now, before we get started, I want to show you the ingredients that I'll be using today. Follow me. Alright, so I got a combination of Munich malt and Crystal 40, some flaked oats to create a creamier mouthfeel, some wheat malt extract that I'll be throwing in there. I have some skinned tangerines that I'll be throwing in the boil as well, with some of this tangerine juice and pulp. And then I have some Tettinger and Cascade hops for bittering and flavoring. And then the yeast I'm using is WLP 320 from White Labs. Alright guys, so now that we have our ingredients ready, the first real step in brewing is to heat about 2 to 3 gallons of water up in a brew kettle like this one. So we're going to let that heat up to 150 to 160 degrees, and then we're ready for steeping temperatures. At that point, I'm going to take the grains and steep them in this hot water to extract all the sugars and proteins. So while we wait, let's have some beer. Cheers. Alright, so now we have the brew kettle up to 165 degrees. I want it to stay in that range to maybe 155 for the next 30 minutes. In those 30 minutes, I'm going to be dropping in the grain bag, and then also I'm going to be dropping in some flaked oats. I chose to go with oats in this recipe because I wanted a smoother, creamier mouthfeel. It's kind of experimental, but that's part of the brewing process. So I'm going to drop in these grains and let them steep for 30 minutes. Alright, so our grains and our oats have now finished steeping for the 30 minutes. The next step is to sparge those grains. The purpose of sparging is to expel any of those last remnants of sugars and proteins into the wort. To do that, we heat water separately to 170 degrees and pour it right on top of the grains as they basically drip right back into that wort. Alright guys, so the grains have finished steeping and now we've completed the sparge. The next step is going to be adding the liquid malt extract. Now this thing is packed with sugars. This is going to ensure that the yeast has plenty of food to eat that it can then convert into alcohol later. So my 6-pound container of wet malt extract has been sitting in a hot pool of water cooling down. Now the reason why I do this is because the malt extract is a lot like maple syrup. It just kind of sticks. And you want to make sure that you get as much of it as possible into your wort. So by heating it up, we're going to get more of that malt extract out of the container, which means better tasting beer. Okay guys, here's the malt extract, and now it's going in with our wort. Okay, so remember when I told you that you really want to get as much of this malt extract out as possible? Well, take a look at this. I got most of it, but there's still quite a bit left. So I know a little trick that I learned from a friend. We're actually just going to put some hot water in here, shake it up. That's going to loosen up the rest, and we're going to get all the malt out of here. Alright, so now look at that. clean as a whistle. So we got everything out. Now it's time to bring this wort up to a boil, and we'll start adding our hops, our tangerine peels, and our tangerine juice. Okay guys, so we officially got this brew up to a boil. The hop break wasn't too bad, so I didn't bother even recording it. But now that we're at a full rolling boil, we can add the hops and start our 60-minute timer. Alright, so the first hops that we're adding at the beginning of the boil is going to be Tangerine hops. Now, the first set of hops that you add at boiling is typically going to be your bittering hops. This is where you get those bitter flavors. This is a really small amount, it's only about an ounce, so there shouldn't be much bitterness in this beer, but it is still going to help it nonetheless. So here it goes. So now that we've dropped those hops in, we're going to set our timer for 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, we're going to drop some more hops in there, and then I'm also going to add the tangerine peel and the tangerine juice. Alright guys, we are now 30 minutes into the boil. It's time to add some more hops. This time we are adding Cascade for flavoring. On top of the Cascade hops, I still want a larger citrus flavor in there. So what I did is I bought some organic tangerines. I peeled them and I juiced them in a bag. So now I'm going to add the juice and the body of the actual tangerines into this boil. Alright, so here is the bag with all the tangerine pulp and body. We're dropping that right into the boil right now. And now we're also going to add some real tangerine juice. This is basically what I squeezed out of the tangerines earlier. So that's just going right in here. And hopefully that really gives it a nice natural flavor. Alright guys, so we got about 15 minutes left in the boil. I have some tangerine peels in here. These tangerine peels, I made sure that once I peeled them, I cleaned off all the white stuff. Usually don't get much good flavor out of that. In fact, it probably would make my beer more bitter. This is all the sweet skin off the tangerine. We're dropping this right in the boil. There's a lot of it because I had about 6 tangerines. Now because we only have 15 minutes left in our boil, I'm going to go ahead and toss in this wort chiller. We have to sanitize this thing because as soon as this wort stops boiling, then we risk contamination. So if we sanitize this, then once we move it to the sink, we can filter some cold water through these coils, and it's going to cool that beer down nice and fast. I always make sure too that the hoses aren't touching anything that's getting really hot. You do not want to melt those hoses. 1, you're going to have a really bad mess, and 2, your wort chiller is not going to work. So now we just wait until the last couple minutes. We got 1 more ounce of Cascade to add into the mix just right before boil out, and then we're ready to cool this thing down. We're down to the last couple minutes of brewing, guys. It's time to add the last little bit of Cascade hops, and then flame goes out, and it's time to cool this beer down. Alright guys, so we're sitting just below 200. You can see that dial dropping pretty fast. That's because we have the wort chiller in there. And it's literally just running through this sink hose, cycling cold water through this hose, into the coil, through the wort, out the other end, and then it's just coming right back out here. So that's going to cool the wort down pretty fast. I mean, since we started talking, it's already been chilled about 20 degrees. It's insane. Basically, we're waiting until this wort cools to about 80 degrees. Now, once the wort's been cooled down, everything that touches it has to be sanitized. Otherwise, we risk contamination. So while we're doing that, I'm also sanitizing all of my equipment that I'll be using after we cool the wort. So the wort has now cooled down to 80 degrees. It's time to pour it into the fermenter and get this turned into beer. Alright guys, so we finished pouring the wort into the fermenter, but we're missing a couple things. First off, our 5-gallon marker is right here, so we're a little short. And the reason for that is we're not boiling with 5 gallons of water. We were only boiling with about 3.5. So we're going to add some more water to this fermenter to get it at 5 gallons. And then the final piece of the puzzle is to add the yeast. Alright, now there's a crucial part of the brewing process that I could not forget, and this is measuring the gravity of our wort. Now, measuring the gravity of your wort is oftentimes called original gravity, and basically what that means is we use a device like this. It's a lot like a thermometer. It looks like a thermometer, but basically it measures the density of our wort in comparison to the waters and the sugars. So I'm going to drop this in here and we're going to take a gravity reading. Now once this is ready to bottle, I'm going to take another gravity reading, and once I put those two numbers together, we're going to know what the ABV of our beer is. So one thing that I've learned how to do watching a lot of brewing videos is you spin this device and it makes sure it gives you a nice accurate reading. It's right around the 1045 range. So usually for an original gravity you want to shoot for about 1050, but that's okay. We just have to make sure that we jot down this number so we can get our final gravity reading and know the ABV of this beer. Oh, and another cool part of measuring the gravity of your beer is you get to try your wort before it becomes alcohol. If you've never had wort before, it doesn't taste like beer. It literally tastes like sugar, grains, and then whatever else you've thrown in there. So this has got a little bit of that bittering hops. It's pretty mellow though, but a lot of that tangerine flavor that I threw in there, and then the nice weedy grains. I cannot wait till this is beer. This is gonna be delicious. But enough talking. Now it's time to pitch the yeast and turn this thing into beer. Okay. It's time to pitch the yeast. This is the most important part of making beer. Without the yeast, you have nothing but wort. The yeast, what it does is it actually eats all the sugars inside your wort and converts it into two things, alcohol and CO2. The CO2 is going to escape out of this fermenter with an airlock, so nothing gets in, but the CO2 can get out. The alcohol stays inside. That's where we get our beer. Okay, so what you're looking at right now is the wort, and I have that packet of yeast, and I'm just pouring it right into this wort, and as soon as I do this, technically this is now beer. I love these pre-made packets of yeast instead of the dry yeast, because you literally can just defrost them. They're ready to go. And I've also noticed that that when I brew with these, they also tend to get fermentation started a lot quicker. Most dry yeasts that I've used take about a day, day and a half, even 2 days. At some brews I've done have taken 2 days. But these guys are usually really fast. And right now what I'm doing is I'm literally just squeezing every last drop of that yeast out of this packet because I really want to utilize it. I want to get everything out of there. Okay guys, this thing is ready to ferment. We are putting the lid on. It's important to make sure it's sealed all the way around. You do not want anything escaping out of here. The only thing you want escaping is CO2, and that's gonna go out of the airlock. Here is our sanitized airlock. This is going right on top here. And that's where the CO2 escapes. We've got to put this little cap on as well. And then pour a little bit of sanitized water about halfway up. Usually do just a little extra, just because sometimes that sanitized water drops into the wort. I don't want this getting empty when I'm not around. But there you go. We are ready to make some beer. Alright guys, so there you have it. We have now brewed beer. The next step is in about 7 to 10 days, I'm gonna move this now beer into a secondary fermenter. There I'm gonna throw even more tangerines inside. The reason for this is I want to extract as much tangerine flavor as possible. I'm going to record that part next, and then the final step is bottling. Alright guys, the Tangerine Hefeweizen has been sitting in the fermenter for 7 days. Now we're going to move it into a secondary fermenter. And in that fermenter, we're going to add more tangerines. Now what I did is I peeled a bunch of tangerines, put them into a freezer storage bag, squished them up so I could get all the juice and all the pulp flowing, and then I put them in the freezer. Now the reason why you want to put your fruit in the freezer before you use it with your brew is there might be a lot of contaminants that are in that fruit. And if you expose your beer to those contaminants, it can completely ruin your beer. So all my brewer friends, they told me if you're going to use fruit during your brew process, to definitely freeze it ahead of time. I'm using about 8 pounds of tangerines, so this thing is going to be a tangerine bomb. I can't wait to try it. Now that I have all my stuff sanitized, it's time to actually get this process started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take those frozen tangerines and I'm going to put them in a sanitized grain bag into the secondary fermenter before I put my beer inside of it. Now I know that looks like mush, but it's actually frozen, crushed up tangerines. So that thing's gonna enhance the flavor of this beer a lot. The next step is to move our beer from the primary fermenter into the secondary fermenter. To do that process, I have what's called a siphoning hose. It has an auto siphon attached, and basically what it does is it's gonna pump the beer through this tube down into our secondary fermenter, and that's where it's going to sit for another week or two before we start bottling. So we finished moving the beer into the secondary fermenter with those crushed frozen tangerines. The next step is another waiting process. This time around I'm probably going to wait 2 weeks because I really want to get the most flavor out of those tangerines as possible. After the 2 weeks is up, we're ready for the next step. I'll see you at bottling. We have reached the bottling stage. Now that our beer's been in the secondary fermenter with all those tangerines for about 8 days, I'm going to move it into a bottling bucket. That bucket I'm going to use to fill bottles full of this beer. The first step I had to do is sanitize all my equipment. We need to sanitize our equipment because they have not been placed in the bottles yet. So until that happens, we need to make sure that everything is as clean as possible. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer my beer from the secondary fermenter into a bottling bucket below. Alright guys, so we left out an important step that we have to do before we actually start bottling the beer, and that's to measure the gravity and give it a taste. So I just measured the gravity. It finishes at 1.01, which means based on our original gravity reading, this beer measures out at just under 4%. That is a very light hef, but I'm okay with that. This was not meant to be a strong beer. It was supposed to be a lighter beer anyways. And now the best part, we get to try the beer. This has got all the grainy flavors of a hef that I love, and it's still packed with that tangerine flavor. I could have gone a little bit longer, but I didn't want to overdo the tangerine to where it just completely blew out all other flavors. This tastes pretty darn balanced. Now for those of you at home, just so you know, this is not the finished product. We still have to bottle the beer, and in those bottles, they're going to ferment a little bit longer. They're also going to carbonate inside the bottle. A carbonated beer tastes way better than a flat beer. However, this is absolutely delicious, and I can already tell this is going to end up being probably one of my best homebrews I've done yet. Just check out that color. That is absolutely beautiful. It reminds me of the summertime. I'm quite excited. Well, now comes the least fun part of the brewing process, at least in my opinion, and that's bottling. So let's get started. All right, guys. I have the beer up here in the giant fermenter. I have a hose running down from the spigot, and then I have a bottling wand. The bottling wand is a tool that I'll use to fill up the beers. So now I'm going to go one by one, fill up each beer, cap it with a bottle capper, and then set it aside. This process, depending on how much beer you make, can take anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour. So sit back, relax, watch me bottle some beer. Alright guys, so we had a very successful bottling today. We managed to render 50 bottles of beer, and that's including 4 22-ounce bottles. For any home brewer, the more beer you can get out of a batch, the better. So I'm extremely happy with the results. Now the last step to this whole brewing process is to actually drink it. So the next stage, we're just going to wait 2 weeks until those bottles carbonate, and then I'm going to tell you how the Tangerine Hefeweizen actually tastes. Alright guys, so it's now been 2 weeks since I bottled the Tangerine Hefeweizen. So I'm here with John, and we're going to try it together and tell you guys how it turned out. Okay, so one of my viewers saw my last tutorial on how to homebrew, and he brought up the fact that he wanted to see how the beer actually turned out. So I thought I would add this at the end of the video so you can really see the finished product. So that's what John and I are going to do right now. John, let's have some beer.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Damn, that's good.
Yeah. It's definitely tangerine-y. I mean, off the aroma itself, you're getting pure tangerine aroma. There's a little bit of the wheat grains that you're picking up, but it's extremely subtle. I mean, this is definitely a tangerine beer. There's no doubts about it whatsoever. When you dig into the beer itself, it's just packed with tangerine flavor. It almost kind of elevates it a little bit. It's not your heavy Hefeweizen. It's light. You're still getting the malts. You're still getting all the grains out of it. But it's solid tangerine flavor throughout the entirety of this thing.
Definitely. So it's almost like biting into a tangerine. So in that first nice sip, and like Jeff said, you get like the malty and the wheat is still all there, and it is a beer, but it does have kind of notes of maybe like a cider in a way, just because of the sweet tangerine taste that you're getting. But it's still definitely a beer, and it still has that taste that you're looking for when you're trying to drink a beer, right? The malts, the wheat, all of it, right? It's delicious. It's very, very good.
Next time around, I would probably use a little bit less. I would say, since this was about 10 pounds worth of tangerines, I would probably use maybe 6. I feel like that would be a little bit more balanced. But overall, I mean, I'm quite happy with the product. I made this for my mom. She loves fruity beers. Tangerine's one of her favorites for sure. And it's extremely light and drinkable. It measures out around 4%. So, I mean, this is definitely like a nice hanging out in the sun, drinking a nice hef, and you don't have to worry about it weighing you down all day.
Yes, totally agree. And so definitely, I think we're gonna save some of these for a nice hot summer day coming up.
Definitely.
And enjoy them.
Yeah. So guys, that's the process from start to finish. You guys saw the wort boil, you saw the move into secondary, you saw the bottling, and now you saw the tasting. So that's it. That's how this homebrew is made. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. If you want to see me do more homebrew videos like this one, let me know what you're interested in seeing me make. And make sure you leave a comment below about your thoughts about this kind of beer. And if you're a home brewer yourself, if you have any tips on how I maybe can improve this in the future, I would love to hear from you. So other than that, I'm Jeff.
I'm John.
And we'll see you next time on Let's Have Some Beer.
Let's have some beer.
Cheers.